Hi, friends. I'm Father Kerry Walters, pastor of Holy Spirit American National Catholic Church, and this is another Holy Spirit moment. This one on Decoding Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is one of the wisdom books in the Hebrew Scriptures. It is a fascinating book, but it is an also incredibly vexing one. And the reason for that is that it's not at all clear what the author is up to. And it's precisely because of this ambiguity in the text that it can be read in so many different ways, depending upon what the reader brings to the text. So, for example, an individual who tends to be of a stoical mindset is likely to read Ecclesiastes as a stoic document, or at least a proto-stoic document. A cynic might read the book as a record of an incredibly cynical mind. An individual who believes that everything is meaningless could read the book as a record of despair. I think that all of these interpretations are certainly reasonable in that you can pick out places within the text of Ecclesiastes that seem to support them. But I want to argue that something else is going on in the book of Ecclesiastes. Although, once again, the book is so ambiguous that I don't want to be dogmatic about this. So please take my interpretation for what it's worth. Ecclesiastes probably was written sometime between, say, 400 and 200 BC. The title, Ecclesiastes, is a Latin translation of the original Hebrew, which is Koheleth. And Koheleth means a gatherer or an assembly person, or it can also mean one who gathers an assembly together. Martin Luther, when he translated the book of Ecclesiastes, translated Koheleth as the preacher. I'm not sure that's the best translation, but it's a translation that has frequently stuck. So, what does the book actually say? Well, it seems to argue that everything that you and I encounter in this life, and indeed all of our behavior and actions and aspirations in this life, are but vapor. We read that almost 40 times in the book of Ecclesiastes, that everything is mere breath, vapor, ephemeral, non-lasting. It's frequently translated as vanity, particularly the King James version of Ecclesiastes. Vanity, vanity, all is vanity. But the actual Hebrew word is hebel, and that means breath or vapor. So, more specifically, what is the vapor of human existence? Riches are nothing but breath, nothing but vapor, says old Koheleth. They can be taken from us at any time. We can lose them because someone has robbed us of them. We can lose them because of some natural disaster. And we will indeed lose them one day for sure when we die. And so somehow placing all of one's faith in the accumulation of riches is vanity, is but vapor. It will not last. Pleasure, ditto. We can try to throw ourselves into the delights of sensuality, and we can also try to throw ourselves into the delights of artistic beauty. But we will discover that there is a point of diminishing return, says Koheleth, that sooner or later we become jaded, we become weary of beauty and weary of sensual delight. So it too is vanity or vapor or mere breath. Wisdom, surprisingly enough, is likewise hebel, is likewise nothing but vapor. We search and search and search for the deep meaning of existence. We read book after book. We think and we scrutinize and we reflect. And at the end of the day, we seem to be no closer to discovering those ultimate answers for which the heart yearns than we were at the beginning of the day. We may have accumulated a whole lot of information, but that's not what we're looking for. What we're looking for, if you will, is an overarching purposefulness to existence that will make our lives meaningful. That too is therefore vapor, hebel, ephemeral, vanity. Is that all that can be said? I don't think so. And I think that the crucial verse in this particular book that steers us away from those kinds of interpretations is chapter 3, verse 11. In that particular verse, Koheleth says something that is even more mystifying than the rest of his book. And it's partly mystifying because we don't quite know how to translate it. Let me read you one version of chapter 3, verse 11. I see that God makes each event right for its time. That is, each event is timely. Each event occurs in time. Yet God has put in human minds an enigma, so that we cannot discover what it is that God has been doing from beginning to end. Now, the problem there is the word that is translated here as enigma. It can also be translated as darkness, or it can be translated as timelessness, or it can be translated even as eternity. The Hebrew word is olam. What in the world is Koheleth getting at here? I think that ultimately what he's saying is this: you and I are finite creatures. We have no way of thinking about or relating to anything that isn't likewise finite. And everything that is finite is in the temporal dimension in which we dwell. Everything that is timed. As Koheleth says at the very beginning of his book, to all things there is an appropriate season. And because we are finite, which is expressed by saying that God has put an enigma in our mind, or a darkness in our mind, or a timelessness in our mind, because we can't comprehend timelessness, because we're finite, we simply cannot grasp the whole, even though we may yearn for it. And so what we try to do is to compensate for our inability to grasp the whole by, for example, pursuing wealth or pursuing pleasure. I believe what Koheleth is trying to tell us is that we need to remember who we are. We are finite creatures placed in time, but we can have faith that we are finite creatures placed in time by a God who dwells in eternity. And he goes on to say several times throughout the rest of the book that what that means is that we ought to strive to enjoy the moments that we encounter of life, that we need not worry about the overarching picture, that what we ought to do is to throw ourselves into living and obey God's laws. If we do that, says Koheleth, we will lead lives that are happy and in their own way meaningful. If we strive to transcend our finiteness, all will be vapor, and we will become frustrated and perhaps cynical to the extreme. Think of the Tower of Babel. That story suggests that human beings try to outrun their finitude by building this tower that would reach to heaven, which surely is a symbol for overstepping the mark of who and what one is as a human being. Koheleth is warning us not to try and build more towers of Babel, but instead to accept who and what we are. Or think of the ending of the book of Job, which of course is another one of the wisdom books in Hebrew scriptures. Job has been demanding to know answers for why innocent people like he is suffer. And what does God say to Job? God speaks out of the whirlwind, out of the seemingly chaos of the universe, which isn't, of course, chaotic at all. And he says to Job, even if I try to explain things to you, you simply would not be able to understand them, because I dwell in an infinite and eternal space, and you are finite and temporal. There is simply too much of a gap between us. Or think of what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, chapter 6 of Matthew, to be explicit. Jesus says to his disciples, don't worry about tomorrow. Don't allow anxiety about where your next meal will come from or about when and how you might come to die. Simply trust in God. Simply live in the moment and trust in God. Look at the birds of the air, says Jesus. They have no worries, and yet they seem to be ecstatically happy. You can tell that by listening to their beautiful songs. Or look at the lilies of the valley. They don't worry, and yet they are beautiful. They live wonderful lives that exude symmetry and harmony and beauty. I don't know if Jesus, in saying this, has been influenced directly by the book of Ecclesiastes, but I do suspect that the same sense of living in the present and trusting in God for the broader, bigger picture that Koheleth writes about was shared by Jesus. The lesson, it seems to me, for Jesus, however, as believing Christians accept, is that Jesus somehow bridges that gap between the temporal and the eternal, the finite and the infinite. Jesus, as God become human, brings us closer to God and God closer to us. That still means that we ought not to over worry about the broad picture, but we have even more assurance now with the incarnation of God that we do live in a universe that is benevolent, we do live in a universe that is purposeful, and even if we can't discern that overall purpose, because as Koheleth says, the enigma or the timelessness that God has implanted in our minds, we can trust that it's there. I'm Father Kerry Walters, and this has been another Holy Spirit moment. Thank you for watching, and I will see you again soon.